Hey, hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. This is another Red Pill Religion podcast, and I am John Baptiste, and we're going to be talking about the news. Um, Tonight we have a special guest, Neffel. Uh, Say hi, Neffel.
Uh, hey there, it's me, Neffel. I'm host of the Common Neffel channel, and also host of the Half-Ass podcast with my spooky co-host, one half of Neffel Unsummoned, which basically we pretty much talk politics, news, anything that's pretty much on our minds without a filter. Anyway, be right back.
Yeah, and they can find you on YouTube under the Common Neffel.
Yep, that's right.
Right. Are you on Twitch too or no?
Yeah, I'm on Twitch, but I rarely use it these days.
Okay. All right. So, um, search the Common Neffel after the show. I'll probably put it in the low bar his channel and everything. So we're going to talk tonight about a few things that has been going on, and you know, the thing that everybody is talking about, it seems, is the is China's land on the dark side of the moon.
Yeah,
Um,
this is relatively interesting because this spell signs for now for the US to push for its space force a lot sooner than we would anticipate. Because it seems that both the United States and China are now pretty much going to enter into a space race. And back then, like probably around the time of Nixon, since they kind of became trading partners, now it seems that under U.S. President Donald Trump that the United States is now going to compete with China for global economic interests and as well as trade interests as well.
well, I mean, everybody was worried about Trump starting a trade war, and it's like, no, China's been being underhanded for decades. I mean, not just to their own people, but to United States, to Europe, to Asia. They're not really. I mean, they're not a peaceful nation.
No, of
Um,
course not. They've been. I mean, before China unified into what 1944, and with unification, China used to be like a region of many provinces where, they would wage war with each other.
oh, they that unification was forced. But that's
Yeah,
more history.
because contrary to popular belief, there's not like one group of Chinese. There, it's like the Chinese people have many different ethnicities living together in various provinces,
Right,
and there's
and
also like different versions of Chinese.
yeah, but with how the Chinese government is, everybody calls themselves Han Chinese. Because if you're a minority in China, if you're not Han Chinese, then you're not going to have all the benefits. Thanks to a communist society. But the rover, the Chinese rover, landed on the moon's Von Karman crater at its south pole, which is 1,600 miles across. It's basically from Central Florida to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, or from Central Florida to Detroit, Michigan. It,
I
it's
see.
it, it's about that's how big that crater is. I mean, it's not. That's the crater that they dropped into. We don't really know much more than that. I mean, they dropped down on the dark side of the moon, a side of the moon that we don't really um, actually monitor. Really,
Yeah.
in order for them to get images, they have to relay it like from a relay satellite on the that's sitting on the far side of the moon in orbit around the moon, um, and it bounces from that satellite, and the satellite sends it to Earth. So and because it's China, we're probably not going to know what they actually find. all we know about where they are, and where they landed and stuff is what they told us. But
Yeah,
they're going to try to grow potatoes. It seems.
yeah, and the first thing what they're going to do, because when they release it's a rover, and we all know because when it comes to Chinese government, their information may not be very reliable, so we have to take their words with a grain of salt. But if it's legitimate, this could spark, like I said before, not only this could spark like a second Cold War between the like a Cold War between the United States and China, because it's
But
now is also entering a space race, as you mentioned this before you started streaming.
yeah, it's. I think that it's very much going to go into a space race. We'll actually see our first space war. It'll probably involve drones because, to be honest, it's fighting war in space. With manned vehicles is stupid. Um,
Yeah, I think these days when it came to the introduction of the Predator drones and the introduction of AI and robotics, manned ground troop, manned vehicles, and also maybe even human troops may be a thing of the past, and that could be a good or bad thing because there's also some gray areas because assuming that regarding AI hasn't really achieved like full awareness and that hasn't happened yet, chances are these machines could get hacked by the enemy combatants with some basic computers.
right, but as far as humans actually fighting a war in space, I don't think it's physically possible because you're not only you know there's when there's no gravity in space, but when you put your thrusters on and you at full tilt and you turn or get your craft to spin, you could theoretically simulate gravity. It'd be kind of like how a gravitron from the county fair works. Um, you could do that, but in an actual like you know if you're dogfighting in the air, it'd be completely different. One, we'd have to actually create a new type of vehicle, and then you have the G-force problem, which you're traveling in orbit. You're basically continuously falling in space. Um, it's you would have the pilots killing themselves before they were actually able to kill each other. Essentially, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And then you also had the Van Allen belts problem because if any type of war that would happen, wouldn't really happen in low Earth orbit. It'd be like the medium because low Earth orbit is just below the Van Nuys belt. Then you have the Van Nuys belts, which is massive radiation belts, and then you have a the lunar the I forget, I think it's the translunar plane or something like that, um, which is above the Van Allen belt. So a majority of a manned space war would happen in Van Allen belts, and again, high doses of radiation. You know, you wouldn't. It's just not conducive to bio. We don't have the technology to
No.
actually do it safely. We
Yeah,
don't
that's
have the
true.
technology to actually live in space for longer than a month. That's why we don't have anything, above low Earth orbit. Um, like the International Space Station is in low Earth orbit. There's just like a lot to space. It's not just this empty vacuum. It's this
Yeah.
vacuum that is filled with radiation.
Oh
You know,
yeah, it's a very hot. It's a very hostile place to be in, and possibly even more dangerous than anything else we may have to deal with on Earth. It's like the rather interesting paradox regarding when it comes to going in outer space because there's a thought that lures in my mind regarding how space travel may be feasible or how to colonize space because even then we just don't have the technology capable of handling it. chances are they'll probably send machines and drones like the rovers, and they're already on Mars.
Right,
But there's
and
also been talks on using nanotechnology technology to using nanotechnology in space exploration.
yeah, I mean, I think that it'd just be easier to use drones at first because when you're actually basically drones are would be fairly similar to to a space sim. In space, a drone would work similar to it. You'd have the same type of HOTAS system or double stick, um, however the Space Force actually does it. But it's essentially with drones, it's a lot easier because you have how many people, how many gamers, and how many of these gamers are flight sim enthusiasts because it's very like the whole drone thing is they train on basically video games.
Yep, that's true. And we've also seen the kind of breakthroughs that come from video games, like with the some very accurate laser surgery that's probably precision, and with the thing that's used to operate, it looks similar to a game control.
Yep, because it's very easy to use. But as far as this story goes, the rover has ground penetrating radar, infrared imaging spectrometer to identify the surface material and gases. They're definitely setting up to create some kind of permanent installation. They have an analyzer to reveal how solar wind interacts with the lunar surface and possible formation of water. And experiments that deals with potatoes and silkworm eggs. Um, the sealed container of both will have Earth-like conditions, except for the low lunar gravity. If the eggs hatch, the silkworms would breathe the oxygen produced by the plants through photosynthesis. Essentially, that's what they're claiming. They're trying to see if they can put a sealed environment that biological organisms can actually do. Like this is all the makings of another space race, the colonization of the moon, or if our government wants to do the hard thing before China, Mars. But I very highly doubt that the U.S. will stand for China having an actual base on the moon for very long.
Yeah, very true. Because one thing is also because it could also be costly maintaining such a project.
Right. Well, I mean, currently you just have a drone that's whole possible thing is to see if there's water on the moon and see if there's anything underneath the surface. It's definitely a scouting mission to colonize the moon. And once the moon starts to be colonized, all the other spacefaring countries are going to follow.
Yep, that's true. Because because it also serves their economic and political interests.
Well, that and it gives China a big
A
possible
big
mineral and material growth, as well as a intelligence advantage.
Yep, that's true. It's going to be it's going to be interesting. It's going to be very interesting in the years that follow.
All right, so our next episode, our next story, since we're talking about China, sink two aircraft carriers. Chinese admiral's chilling recipe to dominate the South China Sea. This is another reason why I think that this comes from news.com.au, an Australian news website. But this is why I think that the colonization of the moon will lead to a drone space explosion, because I think that China is very much ready to say the South China Sea is China's, even though the East and South China Seas. So the East and just the Philippines, Thailand, all these countries that are in the South China, they're saying it all owns. We own the sea, and they're going to also use that to say we own these islands too. It's going to start some trouble. Possibly a naval war, but China has been doing the saber rattling for decades now. They actually built their own island.
Wow.
But right now they're talking about actually sinking aircraft carriers. So what do you think about this?
I'd say the U.S. government is not going to take that lightly, because if knowing Trump, he's probably going to make a counter. He's going to make a counter remark to that, and then it's basically they'll probably get into a shouting match. China says this is what they're going to do. United States says this isn't what they're going to do, and basically they'll have a summit to discuss and negotiate, and business as usual.
Right, but Admiral Lu, the Chinese admiral, well, one, they're trying to say they're island fortresses, which are giant, giant ships, are impossible to defeat. And his speech, which was delivered on December 20th, which, by the way, the American mainstream media completely silent on this, completely silent on what's going on. This is actually come from Taiwan's Central News Agency. Reports Admiral Lu gave a, or Lao, Lou, gave a wide-ranging speech on the state of Sino-U.S. relations. The high-profile hawkish military commentator reportedly declared the current trade spat was definitely not simply friction over economics and trade, but was instead a prime strategic issue. His speech, delivered on December 20th to the 2018 Military Industry List Summit, declared that China's new and highly capable anti-ship ballistic and cruise missiles were more than capable of hitting U.S. carriers, despite them being at the center of a bubble of defensive escorts. What the United States fears the most is taking casualties. Now, I'm going to stop right there and say, if they were to actually if Admiral Lu was actually to put his, money where his mouth was, to actually carry through with these threats, we invaded Afghanistan because of a very thin link to of the Taliban to Al Qaeda. We invaded Iraq because the CIA thought that there was yellow cake uranium in Iraq. So, if China actually blows up one of these aircraft carriers, which the aircraft carriers we have in the South China Sea isn't our entire naval force. So we'll have our naval force come in. That includes our stealth submarines, and we'll have a full out war for the South China Sea.
Oh yeah, it would basically be an act of war if China even tries to do it.
Oh, it would be that, and then the military would have to respond.
Yeah, and we all know the U.S. military does not fuck around.
No, I mean there's you sink one supercarrier, which is like 5,000 servicemen and women. You sink two of them, they'd be 10,000 servicemen and women. in the Navy alone, there's a lot more than just 5,000.
Oh yeah.
And the two super carriers in the South China Sea isn't our only super carriers. They are there to basically, say China, you gotta stay right because we're in the South China Sea because of Taiwan, because of all these countries that are like, you know, please protect us from, you know, please protect us from China. And then you also have Japan, who is our ally now,
Yeah.
um, who is also very worried about what's going on in the South China Sea, and they've been demanding for years after their 50-year mark after World War II came up to say, hey, we want a navy. China's a threat, and during the Obama administration, they're allowed to start building a navy.
Yep.
So we have a rear admiral, which isn't really a head of the Academy of Military Sciences. So it's basically a Chinese professor running his mouth. Um,
Oh yeah.
a rear admiral isn't really that high. But at the same time, China is communist. So if the rear admiral is saying something publicly to Taiwan, well, for one, they're trying to scare Taiwan because according to China, Taiwan is China. So is the Philippines. So is all of Asia. But so this might be trying to scare the Taiwanese into thinking that America cannot actually protect them from China.
Yeah, and it seems that that because with the alliances we have no other choice but to back those Asian countries up. And who could blame them? Though no wonder why those Asian countries will ally with us. They know what China's capable of.
Right.
But I mean those Asian countries have a history of pretty much not liking one another.
Yeah, and with China saying this is a prime strategic issue, China has been thinking about taking over the South China Sea for decades. You know, the only reason why we are there is, like I said before, we actually intervened at the behest of Taiwan's government, which is a government we helped establish.
Yep.
So it's this is going to be interesting, especially with the people saying we need to send their military home. We have no purpose being in the Middle East. Well, we have a purpose of having airfields in Iraq. It's very close to South China Sea.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean the Persian Gulf is really close to the Eastern and South China Sea. So with the amount with our fleet already in the Persian Gulf and around in Europe and stuff, we would be able to mobilize, to the fight in maybe a week or two. Which if we were just to, if we were just stationed in America, it could take much longer than that, especially for the East Coast fleets, because the East Coast fleets would have to, either go around South America or Africa, go through the Panama Canal, but I don't think our big ships can actually do that. Um, North is not an option. So it's, it's weird thing that's going on right now that it's like, yay, no war, but, the MSM in America isn't actually reporting on this. I could not actually see this from CNN and stuff like that. And this
Yeah.
happened December 20th. This was a January 2nd article from Australia. So I'm expecting maybe in a week or two we'll hear from CNN and MSNBC and the like.
Yeah, but chances are, I wonder why they wouldn't report this in real time. Because if given what's happened, if this was reported on January 2nd, and this event happened 2 weeks ago, then, geez, I wonder who would have the nerve of not telling this to letting the American public know about it.
Well, I mean, you there is a theory by Alex Jones that the mainstream media is in bed with the Chinese. We already think Apple is, because
Yeah,
Apple is
and
basically.
Google's also in bed with Chinese. I'm pretty sure most of these multinational conglomerates are in bed with the Chinese, but they're also in bed with the EU.
Yeah, but Apple is actually part of the Chinese government because they actually operate within China. A thing with China is they don't let businesses actually operate within, without China actually holding a controlling stake in that business, at least in the Chinese operations.
Yeah. Uh, so I guess it's pretty much impossible for any U.S. based. I guess it's pretty much difficult for any U.S. based firm to operate businesses with. And what if they say they basically tell China to go f themselves?
Then they can't operate in China anymore.
And I guess, uh, and they know that China would be a good place of investment, but nowadays it's like, yeah, it's probably more of a liability to invest in China.
Well,
That
you
this
you you actually have Canadian expats that are scared of what's going on. Like, there is a story, I didn't report on it, but before the Christmas time, where you have it was the CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Channel, or whatever they call themselves. Um, the CBC reported this, that there are Canadian expats in China that are like, I want to come back to Canada because of how things are there. They're actually afraid. Um, they've been afraid, since before Christmas. But the American mainstream media isn't reporting on any of this. It makes you think, is is this one of the times when Alex Jones is actually right, that the Chinese and the mainstream media are working together?
Yeah, could be possible. Back then they would with all the stuff that Alex Jones has said regarding about the shady shit that happened within our government, nobody believed it. They pretty much labeled him as tinfoil hat wearer. But now, when all this is coming out, there's a lot of things that now people are starting to think.
Well, this is actually one of the things that I think brings people to the Alex Jones show, is that even though it's done in a provocative way, because his character, his brash, talking, getting animated character, and I do believe it is a character. Um, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with TV personalities and people on YouTube people on Twitch playing a character, because we do have a right to privacy under the Constitution. So it's, if you want your public persona to not be really who you are, that's within your rights to do.
Yep, so true. It's one of the reasons why I use a cartoon demon as my public persona.
That's why I use a cartoon otter that was created for me by somebody. Sorry, I'm trying to get the next story here. The next story comes from the Wall Street Journal. We're talking about France now. Clashes break out as France's Yellow Vest protests show signs of a revival. Now, for those of you that don't know, the Yellow Vest, protesters are people who started protesting, you know, against the government after Macron did his crazy, climate change thing, which I don't actually think climate change is, climate change caused by humans. I don't think it's real. We do, our planet does, our climate, the climate does change. There's evidence that
Yeah,
shows us.
there's no.
There's
Yeah,
natural
it's
cycles, just like
yeah.
there's winter, summer, spring, and whatnot. There's also, you also have, you know,
Solar cycles as well.
solar cycles as well. Yeah, with and the sun, which is basically a huge fission reactor, um, you know, is more of a you know determination on how hot our planet is than what's in our air.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, if the whole greenhouse effect is real, then during the period of time that some people are saying is going to be similar to the Mondar minimum, which was a 50-year period within the Middle Ages when there was an ice age. It wasn't very long, but we haven't had a proper ice age in a long time, and our planet actually goes through natural ice age. The ice age that we most think about is after the dinosaurs ended, and we believe that was created by a a stellar body. But we also had, in between those periods of time, we there was a mini ice age between the Jurassic period and the Triassic period and the Jurassic period. Um, there was ice ages before that big ice age that people believe was created by an asteroid, which it could have been, it could not have been. I mean,
And
it's
and apparently there have been some older civilizations that had existed during the last ice age. It's like throughout the last ice age there had been civilizations that were in existence there, and most of them were pretty much recorded in were pretty much considered like myths. But it seems that recent archaeological evidence has shown that human civilization is much older than we've given it credit for. But anyway,
yeah,
back to the yellow vest protest, because regarding with Macron.
yeah.
Yeah, with Macron's gas tax, it of course it's gonna get people pissed off.
Right, and Macron was like, to everyone must pull themselves together to ensure debate and dialogue can take place. Well, he decided to put this tax on everybody without a debate, without a dialogue, which is what caused the Yellow Vest protests in the beginning. To begin with, it wasn't because Macron did these taxes. He did these taxes um, without actually raising it to the people, essentially, without it actually becoming part. Like, if you're going to do something like this, um, we look at American history too. It is better to actually do these do this type of tax raises in increments, in small increments, instead of just one big increment all of a sudden. Because in smaller increments, people actually deal with it. It's fine. It's just part of reality. But if it's just a sudden huge increase, then people aren't going to stand for it. Especially if they're paying more money, if they're paying the amount of money in gas to actually get back and forth to work than it takes to actually pay a bill. You're actually taking money out of taking food out of their mouths at that point.
Yep. Uh, it seems that Europe is pretty much in for a rude awakening. It has been boiling over for a long time. It's only a matter till that pressure builds up and it was gonna blow.
Well, the whole the crazy thing with that, and they're protesting, right, and you know, they're being actually they're actually being the French government is basically suppressing them. They're showing, they're like, we're not actually free under this government. And that's what they're currently going on about. Um, Support for the movement has declined. Which these type of violent movements, usually the support over these things, if they don't stop with their violence, like that one violent act is usually is usually overlooked. But when you have more and more, it's kind of like Antifa. Antifa, the majority seem to be like, okay, Antifa, deserves to exist. But the more and more extreme they got, the more and more violent they got, the more and more people started to hate them. It's one of the reasons why, Antifa is a terrorist organization and Proud Boys aren't, because the Proud Boys don't actually go around looking for violence. They don't start the violence. They're not there. They show their faces. They don't run around in black masks with bike locks and socks and stuff like that.
Yep, so true. Uh,
And
because the important thing is also, in thing that they fail to realize, it's because optics.
Well, it's not just optics. It's winning the hearts and minds. If you want to, if you want people to actually agree with what your movement and what you're trying to do in your protests, you're not gonna. It's better not to be violent. Martin Luther King actually showed this. Who is more famous, Martin Luther King or Malcolm X? Malcolm X was most famous for being killed by the Nation of Islam because he decided that he wanted to be less extreme than he was. And he was murdered by his own people.
Damn.
Just another reason, and just yet another reason not to trust the Nation of Islam or anybody that actually supports the Nation of Islam. Not that Muslims are bad, but the Nation of Islam is an extremist organization.
Even
supporting
mainstream
them.
Muslims. Yeah, mainstream Muslims does not recognize Nation of Islam as Islamic.
Right, and because they're causing all sorts of crap, like in Northern Africa, is the way it is in part majority because of Nation of Islam. Sudan, the Sudan Civil War. You now have North Sudan, which is Nation of Islam, and South Sudan, which is people who wanted to live in a kind of democratic, basically the Muslims and non-Muslims, is how Sudan is actually split up, and that's happening in North Africa, and we're saying we're talking about economic migrants, right? As far as the migrant refugee crisis, but I don't actually think all of them are. The more I look at what's going on in North Africa, it's like there's no governments there. There's just fighting and war, but it's not war against another nation. So we're not as sympathetic. Like Syria, the West caused that shitstorm. Straight up the West. Europe and the U.S. caused that shitstorm. So we're going to be a little bit more. We're going to be a little bit more sympathetic, but North Africa, Africa, not a lot of people actually know what's going on there, and it's scary. You have in South Africa, you have you've been having the communist movement actually grow, and we see that with the state taking farming lands.
And as a result, if they try to seize the land from the white farmers, South Africa will pretty much wind up like Venezuela because they pretty much got rid of the people who know how to farm.
Well, it's just a weird thing that the Zimbabwe area, well, not the Zimbabwe area. I forget what it's called. It's like the Tudu tribal area or something like that. The farms out there in that part of Africa, that there's like they're arid. Like a lot of South Africa has gone through like a major drought period in the past few years. And that was actually talked about in Lauren Southern's documentary Farmlands.
Yep. Yeah, it's crazy times we live in. I don't understand why people. I understand that when people are desperate, they'll support like very extremist causes such as communism or fascism or even National Socialism. I get that because well, when people are starving and feel like that society didn't give a shit about them, they're gonna turn to extremism because of the whole lack of dialogue, you know?
Well, I mean, fascism was primarily a response to communism.
React. Yeah,
Like
it was.
the Nazi Party was a direct reaction to that. It was a direct reaction to communism, the communism uprising in Germany. You know, because the communists in Germany had something very much like Antifa, communist communist supporters who put masks over their heads and beat the shit out of people who disagreed with them. The Nazis saw this and it was like, okay, we disagree with these people. Let's do the same thing that they're doing. The brown shirts are more famous because, you know, when we hear about the brown shirts, we think that went around and, you know, beat up all the Jews, which that did certainly happen. But, you know, they primarily, you know, in the beginning before Hitler was arrested, um, they were mostly fighting against the communist activists,
Yeah.
essentially the Antifa of the time. Um, and that's what people don't actually understand with Germany. You had the Bolshevik Revolution, which Lenin was seeding this revolution to spread all throughout Europe. He was trying to take over Europe, you know, not through force, but through other ways. You know, to actually creating this grand communist revolution. And then he died, and Stalin took over, and Stalin was like, well, you know, the Nazis took over Germany at this point, and they're building tanks. So I'm going to build tanks too, and we're going to just duke it out. That's essentially what Stalin's mindset was. Um, as far as the whole, that's, and I'm glossing over like 10 years. You know, from 1920s to like 1938, I think 36. Um, you know, so
Yep.
but a lot like in Italy, you know, Italy again, Mussolini's group, they were mostly fighting against, you know, Italian communists. You know, so
Yeah.
it's we're living in a time right now that is similar to how to the conditions
Too
that
similar to
created.
the 1920s and 30s. Yeah, Styx pretty much mentioned that about that a few months ago. And I'm starting to agree because it seems a lot of polarity is starting to kick in because when communists are trying to rise up and trying to take over, it's bound to get a reactionary movement to pretty much, pretty much, you know, to go against it as well. And you start to see the
Well,
center starting to fall apart on itself. But I guess the difference between with the difference between the American right and the European right is that with the American right, the American nationalists and populists, their views they want to preserve the American way of life, the idea of liberty, the idea of liberty, freedom, and and of course in God we trust. European, and it's rather interesting to see the nationalist populist right coming in various different ideologies, forming this sort of this hurricane of sorts. Because majority of the American right are I would describe as libertarian, but not in the like in the Randian sense, but more on the liberty, more on the personal liberty and personal responsibility sense. Because because while personally my economic views are very to the right, and for good reasons, because I pretty much understand how human nature operates.
so our
Even
friend,
I recognize about not to take the whole materialist wealth too seriously and not make it every aspect of your life.
exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
So we have our Charlie Reed, um, who followed us, and he's like so much. He's saying so much ignorance. I'm guessing because we're talking about communism and you know being a big part of why Nazism actually, you know, not just the communism aspect, but you also had, you know, like this huge nuance, you know, but on the street,
Yeah,
you
it
know,
was basically
there was communist agitators, much
yeah,
like Antifa.
and this was because of the result after World War One, when the Treaty of Versailles was signed, and all the the victors of World War One decided to pin Germany responsible for all the problems and made Germany pay reparations for World War One. This pretty much just bankrupt Germany, and it just destroyed its economy.
Well, I
Which
mean, what really caused Nazi, like what created Nazism, essentially was like this nationalist. It was the Volksreich movement. It was this nationalist movement that was very much, you know, not spawned from communism, but they were very much against, you know, communism. Yeah, and you had a lot of you know, weird things. There's like East and West Berlin. It wasn't the Russians that just came in and decided to say we're going to, you know, split Berlin in half. These were Germans who, after the fall of the Nazi, you know, after the fall of the Nazis, they're like, we want a communist Berlin, and they built a wall, um, more or less. That's how that happened.
yeah.
All right, so yeah, our last actual story is from the Guardian, and it's two British Special Forces soldiers injured by ISIS in Syria. There was an ISIS attack after Trump said he would withdraw U.S. troops on 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 a Syrian Democratic Forces base in the town of Deir Izor in the east of the country. That's where the Kurdish fighters were, you know, and it whoa, it was a smart missile attack by ISIS. So ISIS has the ability to launch smart missiles, which isn't really that surprising considering Iraq had like they were selling oil to Russia for, you know, Russia, Turkey, and whatnot. During their embargo, like that whole thing would have been justification to go into Iraq, but you know, again, you know, so Saddam had these weapons. They weren't weapons of mass destruction, but they somehow got a hold of a smart missile, basically a guided missile. Um, you know, and they attacked the YPG, you know, the Kurdish militia in Syria, and you know, killed a whole bunch. You know, killed a fighter, and you know, two British soldiers.
Damn.
And the British Ministry of Defense says we do not comment on special forces. So, but this comes directly after Donald Trump saying, "Oh, I'm going to withdraw the troops from Syria."
It seems that the special interest groups that profit a lot for the whole war in Syria are trying to make sure the United States stay in Syria.
Not only that, but you also have ISIS, who is a paramilitary group at this point. They do go through military style training. Um, they have been wanting to have an actual, you know, war with the United States armed forces uh, since they took, you know, hold of Iraq.
Baghdad?
Yeah, of Mosul and everything. They wanted America to come back. They wanted to fight us, and they still do. They want us to invade, and they want to have a proper war.
All I have to say is and you know what? Just leave ISIS in the hands of Russia.
I mean, yeah, yeah,
Let the Russians and Chinese fight over that.
yeah. I mean, we have more oil than Saudi Arabia and the Middle East. It's plus, you know, with how things are going, um, not just with politics, but with the sun and certain solar um, people who are actually who actually study the sun and study the sun's cycles, climates, if you will. Um, they're thinking that I there's been the word 400-year ice age been thrown around, which I don't really think that that's the case. The Mondar minimum was 50 years. Um, so we'd be looking at
Yeah, and
maybe a 30-year. The all the projections and data that I'm seeing, the models are like 30 to 40 years, a little bit shorter than the Mondar minimum.
ah, but it could still affect international. It could still do serious damage to the breadbasket of the northern hemisphere.
Oh, it most definitely can, but we have technology. We have the technology that if we were to actually, we have until 20, we have 12 years. Um,
Yeah.
but if everybody was to actually grow their own hydroponic style of fruits and vegetables, um, you'd have that covered. You basically
What about the tropical climates during those periods? How would they fare?
I mean it wouldn't be as cold as the northern periods, to be honest. I mean that is assuming that because the sun is not as hot and is not as active, um, the Earth will not be as hot, or so the equator is still going to be warmer than anywhere else. So like in Florida and stuff, you probably see snow and some, like, I don't know. They're it. I would highly suggest people look into growing their own fruits and vegetables at least. Um, maybe if you have a backyard, have a couple goats, a male and female goat. Um,
Ah,
you know, um, I could be wrong. We only have 12 years, so it's a very short period of time. In the grand scheme of things, because climate cycles are like hundreds of thousands, billions of years old. We don't fully know um, our climate cycles. The macro of the meta of the climate. We don't know when the big ice ages come. We have guesstimations based on ice coring, and we have in fossil records, but we don't actually know the pattern because we haven't, as human beings, haven't actually experienced it. Or it's we don't have the data to actually know for a fact what our climate cycles are.
yeah, that's true.
I mean, the human race does not know everything. We don't know
Yeah,
everything about our planet. We definitely don't know everything about our solar system.
we barely know how deep our own ocean is.
Yeah, we have no idea what the moon is composed of.
What the moon is composed of.
Yeah, I mean, you'd say rocks and dirt, but we don't know what's underneath the
There
moon.
could be like there could yeah there could be like mineral there could be like precious valuable minerals on the moon for all we know, and some water. Some people have been suggesting that.
Well, it wasn't until recently we found out that the moon actually has a potassium atmosphere. Um, and that was after we observed an asteroid or a comet actually hit the moon, and it hit the moon and it actually sprayed some water out of it. So we that was our first evidence of something, of liquid actually being on the moon, and that was in like that wasn't that was maybe 10 years ago. It wasn't a long time ago. Um, so it's we there's things about the moon, the solar system, and our own planet we have no idea about.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, there's it's
it's anyone's guess, which is why it's interesting to think about. Which is why we also have science fiction stories to read or watch, because it's a really idea about because it's a good way of thinking about the possibilities of what's out there. And we think all too often that science fiction becomes science fact.
that is very true. All right, so I guess that's it for tonight. We've been going on for about an hour. Um, yeah, hold on. Yeah, we've been going on for about an hour. Um, so I think I think it's time to go.
All right, yeah, totally.
Do you have any final thoughts before we go?
All I have to say is feel free to check out my channel, The Common Effle, to keep up with some live streams. I'm also thinking of uploading regular videos or more frequently because these days, now that I'm out of college, I have more time to upload regular videos rather than just do a live stream.
Yep. And the videos themselves are fairly hard to do, especially if you want to get a good quality. Because you do have to learn. I mean, you easily learn some easy free video editing software. You use Windows Media or like Windows Movies or whatever it was called in Windows 8. But you could use Windows Movie Maker. You could use that to make videos, but it just doesn't look as good um, as the things that you can do with actually learning certain programs.
Yep, sure.
So I wish you the best of luck on that. I truly do.
Yeah, I'm also thinking of getting like a Joe job this year.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right, so everybody, this is a new channel. This is my second show on the new channel. So don't forget to subscribe if you aren't already subscribed. It's not gonna really do anything like tell you when we're going to go live. You can't trust the YouTube algorithm, so actually go to our actual YouTube page around 9-10ish. At least on Fridays, Saturdays. It'll be, on Saturdays I like to try to get it at 10 because, usually my usual co-host is on the West Coast. But, Saturdays at 10, Fridays at about 9. Just hop onto our YouTube channel. That is even then you might not see that we're live. I mean, it's a weird, the YouTube algorithm is weird. The only real, really good way, the 100% way to know when we're going to go live is to join our Facebook group. You go to facebook.com, search Red Pill Religion, and we are there. You'll see us. You'll be able to see our, when we're going live about 30 minutes before we go live. You can also, if you missed that, you can also look at past shows that we've done on www.redpillreligion.com, and there's also ways to actually contribute to us financially if you want to do that. With everything that's going on Patreon, we're not really exactly sure what we're doing. But if you wanna help out with PayPal and whatnot, whatever we have, just you can, and we also very much appreciate your support and actually watching our content, and of course commenting and debating with us about the things that we say. I do check I check the notifications a lot more on the Red Pill channel than my own actual private channel or my own private YouTube account. So more than likely you'll be speaking to any number of the group members. But you can feel free to leave a comment below if you want to contribute to the conversation that we're trying to have. Tell all your friends and enemies, everybody, and God bless.
Later, guys.